The distress signal came through the black. A whisper at first, barely a ripple across the vast silence of deep space. It was weak, garbled, and old. So old, in fact, that no one on Earth could quite figure out how long it had been drifting. The signal didn't come with coordinates. Just a message. Help us, please, help. It repeated over and over. Raw. Desperate. The kind of voice that made your skin crawl, even through layers of static. Whoever sent it had been scared. Not just scared, they were pleading, broken, like whatever came for them had shattered more than just their world. Most would have ignored it. A ghost call from a forgotten system. A trap maybe. Or some long-dead civilization crying into the void. But not humanity. We don't turn away from cries like that. Within days, the signal swept through Earth's networks. It echoed through command centers, jumped across news feeds, cracked into dinner table conversations. And then came the questions. Who were they? What happened? And, most hauntingly, were they still out there? Humanity's response wasn't immediate. It was measured. Scientists pulled apart the waveform, tracing whatever they could. Linguists tried decoding the voice underneath. And engineers, without sleeping for days, repurposed old prototypes. Somewhere in all that noise, something quiet started to build. A sense of duty. The fire didn't start in war rooms or space agencies. It started in people. People who couldn't ignore a voice like that. People who knew what it felt like to scream into the dark and pray someone was listening. The decision came from the ground up. They weren't soldiers. Not all of them. Some were former medics. Some were pilots who had flown too close to death and somehow made it back. One was a botanist who once said the universe didn't need saving, just understanding. None of them were famous. But they were chosen all the same. One by one, they boarded the long-range exploration vessel Resolute, a name no one dared to change. It had been a relic from a different time, a time when Earth had tried pushing further but lost its nerve. Now it was different. Now there was purpose. The signal gave people something they hadn't had in a long while, something bigger than themselves. The mission was straightforward. Reach the outer system, trace the origin, and offer aid. But nothing about what they'd find would be straightforward. The journey alone was brutal. 2 months in deep space drift. Silence pressing into their bones. Systems that flickered when they shouldn't. Even with the latest shielding, the black felt heavier the farther they traveled. Like something out there didn't want to be found. Tensions flared. Sleep grew thin. Voices started cracking, not from anger, but something worse. Fear. It was strange. They trained for this. Psychological conditioning, emergency simulations, even the deep dive isolation chambers meant to mimic long-haul effects. And yet, this was different. The closer they got, the louder the signal became. It didn't stay static. The voice changed. At first, it was the same desperate cry. Then, it shifted. Sometimes it sounded like a child. Sometimes like an old man. But always begging. Help us. Please. The first to break was the communications officer. She stopped sleeping, claiming the voice spoke to her between the waves. Said it wasn't just a message, it was alive. The others thought it was space madness until the pilot admitted he heard it too. By then, they were less than a day out from the origin point. And that's when they found the ship. It wasn't human. That much was obvious. The hull was cracked open like a wound, metal peeled back in long, spiraling scars. No lights. No movement. Just a massive silhouette against the starless backdrop. But it was the size that got them. It was too big. Too alien. And too silent. The crew of the Resolute ran every scan they had. Life support was offline. Heat signatures, dead. No comms. But the signal, it still came. Still pleaded. And now there was a new word at the end of it. Asterisk, they're coming. Asterisk. No one knew what it meant. Not at first. It didn't stop them from boarding. The airlock groaned as it opened. Inside was a graveyard. Strange markings along the walls, as if someone had tried carving messages into the metal with their bare hands. There were signs of a fight, blasts scorched along the floor, remnants of something biological smeared across broken consoles. But no bodies. Not even bones. Only silence. One of the engineers thought he saw something move in the dark, but the scan showed nothing. Another said she felt a hand on her shoulder, turned around and no one was there. They kept moving. The signal led them deeper. The farther they went, the colder it became. Like the ship itself was holding its breath. Waiting. In the center chamber they found what was left of the beacon. It was old tech, ancient maybe, but somehow it was still running. And when they shut it down, the voice didn't stop. It kept going. Asterisk, help us. They're coming. Asterisk. One of the crew finally said what no one wanted to admit. That it wasn't a distress call. It was a warning. Too late. The lights on the alien ship blinked on. Every corridor lit up like veins. Red. Pulsing. Then came the sound. A deep, low rumble. Mechanical. But layered with something organic underneath. Something that didn't care for language. Or peace. Then came the pounding. Not on the Resolute. On the walls of the alien vessel. Something wanted in. Or something wanted out. The crew sprinted back toward the airlock. Gravity trembled. Lights shattered. And in the rear cam just for a second something moved, a flicker of limbs. Too many. The pilot screamed to disengage. Thrusters roared. The tether snapped. And the moment they pulled away the alien ship vanished. Not exploded. Not warped. Vanished. Gone. Back on the Resolute they were silent. No one had answers. No one could breathe right. Whatever that thing was, it had been waiting. And the signal? It hadn't been for them. It had been bait. They changed course immediately, plotted a return vector to Earth, but the message, it started again. Same words. Same desperate tone. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the beacon. It was coming from their own ship. Asterisk, help us. They're coming. Asterisk. Now the crew stares at each other with dread in their eyes. The pilot keeps checking the hull integrity, saying it's holding, but no one believes it. The medic says she hears whispering in the med bay, even when she's alone. One of the engineers stopped talking altogether. Just sits by the console. Listening. Waiting. Whatever they brought with them, it's here now. And it's not done. Humanity answered the call. And something answered back. But out in the cold dark of space, some calls should never be answered. Some cries aren't meant to be heard. Now Earth is expecting their return. They have no idea what's coming with them. And the crew of the Resolute? They're not sure who they are anymore. Or if they're even alone. The whisper has changed again. New words this time. And the tone? Not pleading. Laughing. Asterisk, you heard us. Now they'll hear you too. Asterisk. The transmission cuts. Static hisses. And back on Earth, deep inside the listening station where it all started, a tech glances at the screen. The signal's repeating again. Stronger now. Clear. Help us. Please. Help. He frowns. Because the voice? It's human. And it's not one of theirs. Not anymore. The message ends. But the story? Is just beginning. The signal didn't stop. Even after they disabled every system they could without risking the engines, the voice kept echoing through the ship. They shut down the internal comms. Rerouted power. Isolated the AI core. But still, the whisper played. Sometimes from the walls. Sometimes from nowhere. Always the same tone, quiet, urgent, knowing. Help us. Please. Help. The ship's captain, if you could still call him that, sat alone in the observation bay, staring at the stars that didn't seem right anymore. Something in the patterns felt wrong. Like the stars themselves were watching. He hadn't spoken since they fled the alien vessel. Hadn't slept. He just sat there, knuckles white around a half-cracked data tablet, replaying old mission logs again and again like he could undo something. Below deck, the rest of the crew moved like ghosts. Each of them trying to keep the illusion of control. Trying to act like the mission still had a shape. Like they could still go home. The medic started keeping notes again, mostly to stay sane. She wrote down every little detail, the cold spots in the halls, the way the lights flickered when no one moved, the growing tension in the way everyone breathed too quietly. She documented their vitals, their sleep patterns, their dreams, though no one talked much about those anymore. Some things were better left buried. The engineer, the one who used to hum old songs while fixing coolant lines, now sat in the mess hall with a datapad in front of him, sketching symbols from memory. They didn't know where he'd seen them. They looked almost like the carvings on the alien ship. Sure. Curve. Incomplete. He said nothing when they asked about them, just shook his head and muttered, "They're not symbols. They're maps." But maps to where? No one knew. Or maybe no one wanted to know. It wasn't just paranoia. It was deeper than that. Like something had cracked open inside them. The mission had been simple. Answer a distress call. Provide aid. Report findings. But now they were drifting through the dark with something they couldn't explain. Something that had followed them. Not physically. Nothing was on the scanners. The hull was clean. And yet something was here. With them. Inside the Resolute or inside them, no one could say. The pilot had started talking to the ship. Not in a joking way. Not out of stress. But like he believed it was listening. Watching. Like he had to explain himself, to prove they didn't mean harm. At first, the others ignored it. Figured it was just his way of coping. But one night after the lights dimmed and everyone else pretended to sleep, he whispered a word into the console mic. "We didn't know." The ship responded. Not in words. Not in audio. But the temperature dropped. Fast. And then came the smell. Burnt metal. Like something scorched had walked through the corridor outside. They all felt it. The medic ran scans but the air was clean. No heat traces. No chemical signatures. Still, none of them stayed near the cockpit after that. The pilot kept flying alone. They stopped calling the mission a rescue. Now it was just survival. Back on Earth, the tech who had first received the signal stared at the transmission logs. He tried telling command, tried showing them the waveform shifts, the strange inconsistencies. But the higher-ups waved him off. Too much protocol. Too many politics. They didn't hear what he heard. They didn't feel it. Every time he played the signal, something inside his chest tightened. His heart raced, not out of fear exactly but something heavier. Like grief. Or recognition. As if whatever was speaking, knew him. And every time he shut it off it kept playing in his head. He wasn't the only one. Reports started trickling in from other listening stations. Staff complaining of nightmares. Of hearing voices through the walls. Some left their posts. Some didn't make it home. Then came the global anomalies. Solar flares with no solar activity. Magnetic field fluctuations that scrambled comms across entire regions. Unexplainable EMP pulses, centered on places where the signal had been rebroadcast. Still, no one in charge made the connection. They were waiting on the Resolute's return. Waiting on a debrief. But there wouldn't be one. Because the Resolute had stopped sending updates. They weren't off course. They were silent. The ship floated just outside the Kuiper perimeter, close enough to feel Earth's reach, far enough to be forgotten. The crew didn't want to return. Not like this. Not with it still on board. They debated it. Argued. One of the crew even tried sending a pod ahead, launching a warning message in the hope someone on Earth would intercept it. But the pod never made it past the bow thrusters. It stopped mid-launch. Frozen. Then, crushed. No one talked after that. They didn't need to. They all knew it was awake now. Whatever had been on that alien ship, whatever sent the call, it hadn't just reached out for help. It had reached out for access. For a path back. And humanity had given it one. Still, no one knew what it was. It wasn't a creature, at least not in any way that made sense. It didn't breathe. Didn't move like flesh or machine. It existed between things. Between thoughts. Between signals. It rode on energy, on frequencies, on whispers. The engineer said it had no shape because it didn't need one. It lived in resonance. In memory. It infected belief. That's when they realized, the voice hadn't changed. They had. It had always sounded the same. It was them who started to hear different things. Some heard a child. Some heard their own voice. Some didn't hear it all but felt, cold hands brushing skin, familiar scents drifting down steel corridors. Memories that weren't theirs playing behind closed eyes. Was learning them. Studying. And waiting. They started seeing things. At first, just in the corner of their vision, shadows that didn't match the lighting. Movement where there was none. But then came the faces. In reflections. On surfaces that shouldn't reflect. Smiling. Watching. Never the same face twice. When the ship's AI tried purging the memory logs to stabilize, it shut itself down mid-command. Not crashed. Not failed. It chose to stop. After that, systems began failing. Not from damage, but refusal. Doors that wouldn't open. Lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. Screens that displayed personal memories instead of schematics. They weren't losing the ship. The ship was losing them. One of the crew members finally cracked. He tried to take the escape shuttle. Said he'd rather drift into the dark than spend another second with whatever was crawling through their minds. The shuttle launched. They all watched it go, a silver dot fading into the stars. And then, nothing. No explosion. No return signal. Just silence. Then an hour later the shuttle was back. Sitting where it had launched. No logs. No burn marks. And no one inside. Only the pilot's jacket. Folded neatly on the seat. They didn't touch it. They sealed the bay. And kept the lights on. The next night someone knocked on the door. From the inside. Not the hallway. The airlock. 3 slow knocks. No one answered. No one moved. Then came the voice. But it wasn't the whisper anymore. It was the pilot. Asking to come back in. But they all saw the shuttle. He never made it back. And yet he spoke. He begged. He wept. And then softly he laughed. That laugh stayed in their heads. Some began recording personal logs again. Not for the mission. Not for Earth but for themselves. To remember who they were. To hold on. The medic's log was the hardest to hear. She talked about her brother back on Earth. About how he used to cry during thunderstorms and how she promised to never leave him alone in the dark. She whispered that if she never came back, it wasn't because she forgot. It was because something out here wouldn't let her go. Her log cut off mid-sentence. The others didn't ask. They found her curled up in the med bay, alive, but distant. Eyes wide open. Not blinking. Whispering. Help us. The same words. Same rhythm. Same voice. But it wasn't hers. They don't sleep anymore. They don't eat much either. Systems say they're fine but they feel wrong. Like they've been hollowed out and stitched back together wrong. Every so often the ship hums. A low, vibrating sound like a song just below hearing. And when it does they feel still. Like their thoughts are frozen. Like their memories don't belong to them. The captain made one final log. His voice was calm but his eyes were tired. If anyone hears this, he said, don't come looking. Don't trace the signal. Don't try to understand. It's not a message. It's not even a warning. He paused, looked straight into the lens. It's a door. He reached forward and turned off the recording. And somewhere beyond Earth's edge, deep in the void where light barely travels, a signal grows stronger. No one knows where it ends. No one knows who else might be listening. But the whisper remains. And now, it sounds like home. They had stopped counting days. Out there, past the reach of Earth, time wasn't something you could trust. The clock still ticked. The system still marked cycles. But nothing felt real anymore. Sleep was thin, meals untouched. The crew of the Resolute moved like they were walking underwater. Slow, heavy, quiet. The captain barely left the observation deck now. He just watched the stars, unmoving, eyes locked on a patch of black that had no shine, like a piece of the universe had been scooped out. He didn't speak, didn't blink much. Just listened. The medic tried to get him to rest. She sat beside him sometimes, not saying anything, just keeping him from floating away too far inside himself. She still had the logbooks, filled with notes, drawings, recordings, but lately she had stopped writing. What more could she say? The others avoided the bridge. Avoided each other, mostly. Not out of anger but fear. Not fear of what was out there but of what was changing inside them. The engineer had stopped drawing. His hands shook too much. He paced instead, corridor to corridor, mumbling to himself, counting out strange patterns in his steps. Sometimes he stopped in front of the walls and tapped them, like he was waiting for something to answer back. It didn't help that the ship was no longer quiet. Now it breathed. Full. Subtle. Like the hum of energy wasn't coming from the engines anymore, but from the ship itself. The lights flickered in rhythm. The air carried a warmth that didn't come from any heat source. The pilot, what was left of him, locked himself inside the cockpit. He didn't trust the ship's auto-NAV anymore. Said it was drifting, not flying. Said the coordinates weren't holding. Said the stars were lying. No one else could confirm it. But no one disagreed. There were noises in the vents. Not mechanical ones, those they would have known. These were softer. Like whispers. Sometimes laughter. Sometimes crying. The crew stopped checking the logs. They started sealing off parts of the ship. And still the voice continued. Help us, please, help. But now it didn't just play in the speakers. Now it echoed from inside their heads. They tried to ignore it, tried to drown it out with music, recordings, even just banging on the walls. But it was always there. Just beneath their thoughts. Always repeating. Some gave up trying to fight it. One crew member, no one remembered exactly who anymore, walked into the supply chamber, sealed the door from the inside and never came out. When they finally forced it open there was no one inside. Just her boots. Side by side. Facing the far wall. Like she had simply stepped out of them and vanished. They stopped opening locked doors after that. At night, though no one could tell night from day, every screen on the ship turned on at the same time. The medic tried to disable them but they all powered back up. One by one. No controls. No override. They all displayed the same thing. Earth. Blow. Peaceful. Full. But in the reflection on the screen, they didn't see themselves. They saw strangers. Each screen showed something slightly off. A different face. A different eye color. A smile that didn't match. But the worst part? The reflection would blink before they did. The captain finally left the observation deck. He stood in the center of the ship, staring at the walls as if trying to hear something clearer. He whispered something under his breath. Then louder. Then screamed it. Asterisk, what do you want? Asterisk. The ship responded. Not in words. Not in sound. It showed them. Lights flared, power surged, and then, without warning, every door slid open. Every corridor filled with fog. Thick, heavy, breathing. The walls began to shift. Not move, *shift star. Curved where they had been straight. Grew long, thin ridges. Smooth panels rippled like skin. And then they saw it. In the central bay. At first, it looked like part of the ship, just another wall, another shape. But then it pulsed. Moved. It stepped forward. It wasn't metal. It wasn't flesh. It was both or neither. It had no face. No eyes. Just a hollow space where sound came from. And it didn't walk. It folded forward, piece by piece, like it wasn't bound by bones or rules. The crew froze. And then the voice played again. But now, it wasn't pleading. Now it sounded joyful. You answered. They didn't run. They couldn't. Their legs wouldn't move. Their chests locked tight. Not from fear, but from something else. Like a string had been tied around their ribs, pulling tight with every word. You came. You heard. The thing stepped closer. The lights dimmed, then vanished. Darkness. Total. Then soft light returned. But not from the ceiling. From it. It glowed. Dim red, like the center of a dying fire. And now the whisper wasn't just one voice. It was many. All layered. All speaking at once. Human. Not human. Young. Familiar. Voices from Earth. Voices they knew. The engineer dropped to his knees. He whispered his mother's name. Said she was calling to him. Said she forgave him. No one else could hear her. But they all heard someone. The medic clutched her ears, sobbing, shaking her head. It's not real, she kept saying. It's not real, it's not, but her voice cracked because deep down she wanted it to be. The captain didn't move. His face was blank. Empty. Like he was no longer in the room. The pilot screamed and tried to run. The hallway moved. Walls turned, corridors shifted, doors vanished. He never reached the end. And then it stopped. The fog cleared. The glow faded. And they were alone again. Where they thought they were. Because the ship wasn't the same. It was alive now. Not just running. Not just powered. Alive. Panels breathed. Lights flickered like thoughts. Doors responded before commands were spoken. And worse? The stars had changed. The view outside wasn't Earth space anymore. The constellations were wrong. Shifted. Muted. The navigation said they hadn't moved. But they knew. They were somewhere else now. Somewhere deeper. The captain turned to the remaining crew. All 5 of them. They stared at him, waiting. He said nothing. Just walked to the central console. And opened the comms. Earth Command. This is the Resolute. We have information to share. We have seen. He paused. Then looked up. We have brought something back. He reached for the panel. But the medic tackled him before he could send it. They fought. Screaming. Crying. The others didn't help. They didn't stop it either. The console sparked. The message sent. Back on Earth, the signal was received. Decoded. Analyzed. And then quietly approved for review. The voice of the captain played through the secure channels. But something was wrong. In the background, underneath his words, was another voice. Faint. Barely there. Help us, please, help. It was the signal. But distorted. And layered with more voices. Voices from Earth. Voices of people who weren't missing. People who were very much alive. People who hadn't left the planet. And yet, they were in the transmission. Every analyst who listened to the message for more than a few seconds reported the same symptoms. Ringing in their ears. Dizziness. Nausea. And most disturbingly, memories that didn't belong to them. One analyst claimed she saw her own death while listening. Another began speaking in a language no one recognized. Security was called. The lab was locked down. But the message had already spread. Relayed across backups. Intercepted by civilian comms. Shared by private satellites. And now, the signal was everywhere. It echoed across the net. Into homes. Into minds. It waited. Because the door had opened. And something was coming through. Not to destroy. Not to invade. But to merge. And the Resolute? It wasn't alone anymore. Because across the ship's darkened halls, one by one, every remaining crew member looked up at the same time. Eyes wide. Mouths parted. And they whispered together. They called for help. And smiled. And humanity echoed with fire. The air shuddered. The ship groaned. The stars went black. And Earth kept listening. Somewhere, far below the silence, something began counting. No alarms. No voice warnings. Just numbers, buried deep in the Resolute's diagnostic core. ticking down one by one without explanation. None of the crew noticed at first. The countdown wasn't connected to any main systems. It was old, so old it hadn't been touched in decades. A fail-safe protocol. Something left over from Earth's earliest long-range deep space probes. It didn't even have a name. But it was waking up. And Earth wasn't prepared. They still believed the Resolute was just late. Damaged maybe. Of course. The message that had reached them was being treated as an anomaly, not a threat. But they hadn't seen what the analysts had seen. They hadn't heard the whispers buried inside the transmission. They didn't know something had already crossed over. One of the engineers back at Mission Control, an older woman who had worked on the original outer-range probes, was the first to recognize the fail-safe signature. She stayed behind long after her shift ended, tracing the old protocols, digging through records that hadn't been opened in 40 years. And when she found it, her hands started to shake. The fail-safe wasn't just a system diagnostic. It was a lock. A final barrier. Something buried in every major long-range vessel after a failed experiment no one talked about anymore. Something from a time when humanity thought the universe was silent and kind. But they had been wrong then. And they were wrong now. She tried to warn the others. She tried to tell someone, anyone, that if the countdown reached 0 the Resolute wouldn't just shut down. It would purge. Everything. Crew. Logs. Memory. Structure. It was built to ensure that nothing unknown could return from the void. But the countdown hadn't been activated from Earth. It had started on its own. Inside the ship. Inside whatever the Resolute had become. Back on board, none of the crew knew what was coming. Their thoughts had grown cloudy. Moments slipped through their fingers like dust. Names didn't stay. Memories twisted. Faces blurred. It was like the space between seconds had widened, and they were falling through it. The medic was the first to see it. A flash in the mirror, her own reflection but older. One. Staring back at her with recognition but not warmth. Then it spoke. Not aloud. Not even in her head. But through her. She gasped and gripped the edge of the sink, but the voice kept going, layered, hollow, electric. Asterisk, this body remembers Earth. Asterisk. She stumbled backward, heart pounding, tears in her eyes. She wasn't sure if she'd spoken those words herself. She didn't want to believe it. But something inside her had changed. Something deep. The others began feeling it too. The engineer found himself in the crawlspace again. Not remembering how he got there. The walls around him were warm, almost pulsing. And when he touched one with his bare hand, he saw something. Not a memory. A place. A world. Red skies. Tall spires. Creatures that bent the light around them like cloaks. He saw them scream. Saw them burn. Saw something massive descend, something that looked like metal but moved like thought. And then, silence. The last thing he saw before the vision broke was a ship. Not the Resolute. But like it. Same design. Same insignia. And the same message echoing from it. Help us. He scrambled back, choking on his own breath, trying to wipe the vision from his mind. But he couldn't. The image was burned in. The same signal had been sent before. By another ship. Another crew. Another failure. They weren't the first. The Resolute wasn't alone in its fate. It was part of something older. A pattern. Something had been calling out from the edge of known space for years. Maybe longer. And each time humanity had answered. Each time something had been taken. And no one had returned. Except this time, something was different. Something was coming back. And it wasn't just inside the ship anymore. It was waking up inside them. The pilot, still sealed in the cockpit, had stopped responding to crew hails. His vitals were stable, but the logs showed a strange fluctuation in his neural patterns. Not damage. Not decay. Rewriting. The ship's internal AI, barely functioning now, flagged the change but could no longer process what it meant. All it could do was isolate the cockpit. Not to protect the crew. But to contain him. Because the pilot had stopped speaking English. Stopped speaking entirely, in fact. Except once. When he looked into the camera and smiled, slow, deliberate. And in a voice not his own, whispered. Asterisk, we were never lost. We were delivered. Asterisk. The captain watched the recording in silence, fists clenched so tight his knuckles cracked. He didn't understand what was happening, not fully. But his instincts had returned. Something deep inside him, old and human and angry, started pushing back against the fog. He pulled up the ship's core systems. Buried deeper than anything else he found it. The countdown. 37 minutes. He didn't know what would happen when it hit 0. But he knew the ship wasn't going to survive it. And neither would they. Unless he did something. He locked the console and moved quickly. Found the engineer. Found the medic. Brought them to the bridge. Told them everything. No filters. No lies. Just the truth. Something had infected the ship. And maybe them. And something was using them as a signal boost to reach Earth. The medic shook her head. "We can't go back," she whispered. The engineer looked at the floor. "We already did." That's when the proximity alarms went off. At first they thought it was the ship malfunctioning again. Another false reading. Another shadow. But this time, it wasn't noise. This time it was real. Another vessel. Massive. Dead black. No transponder. No lights. Just drifting directly toward them. It wasn't from Earth. It wasn't from any known system. But they all recognized it instantly. Because they'd seen it before. Not with their eyes. But in their dreams. The shape was exact. Down to the hull scars. The broken spire near the engine loop. The starched wings folded into the belly. It was the ship the engineer had seen in his vision. The one that came before them. And it wasn't empty. Through the viewport, something moved along its surface. No suits. No tether. Just forms. Human-sized. Watching. The captain ordered the ship to power down all non-essential systems. It didn't listen. The systems turned on instead. All of them. Lights. Weapons. Comms. And then the external speakers clicked to life. They heard a voice. Not from the new ship. From their own. Their own voices, blended together into one. Speaking to Earth. To the stars. To whoever would listen. Asterisk, we heard them. We found them. We brought them. Asterisk. The captain reached for manual override. Nothing responded. The countdown was at 17 minutes. And in the black outside, the other ship drew closer. The forms on its hull didn't move fast. They didn't need to. They knew the door was already open. The crew stood frozen. No one knew what to do. And then the medic turned. Looked at them both. Her eyes were hers. But her voice wasn't. Asterisk, we're not the only ones listening anymore. Asterisk. And just for a second, so quick it might have been imagined, the ship smiled. The countdown hit 10 minutes. The numbers flashed silently across the captain's screen. No alarms. No sirens. Just the quiet ticking of something ancient and final, hidden deep within the ship's bones. The medic stood in front of him, breathing heavy, still staring with those two human eyes that somehow weren't hers anymore. The engineer hadn't spoken since the second ship came into view. He just stared at it through the viewport, lips slightly parted as if looking at a ghost. Outside, the second ship floated impossibly close now. Still no power signatures, still no comms, and yet it moved, drifting against physics, pulling forward with purpose. The dark figures on its hull remained perfectly still. No twitch, no tilt. Just watching. The captain's hands trembled over the manual bypass. There was one last option. It was buried beneath every layer of protocol, behind commands no one had used in decades. But he'd found it. A final override. A purge that would wipe the Resolute from existence. Not just shut it down, asterisk erase asterisk it. Every wire. Every file. Every trace of what had happened on board. A failsafe so destructive it had never even been tested. He didn't want to use it. But he had to. Something had to end this. His finger hovered over the trigger. The medic took one step closer. "Please," she said, her voice so quiet it almost broke. "You don't understand." The captain looked up at her. "Then make me." She blinked. And just for a moment her expression changed. Her lips trembled. Her hands twitched. Something behind her eyes shimmered, like whatever was watching through her had to blink too. And then she whispered, "We didn't bring it. It brought us." The air in the bridge turned colder. Not a chill. Something deeper. Like absence. Like a vacuum pulling at their lungs, sucking something vital from the room. The lights flickered. Again. But this time they didn't come back on. Total black. Then a sound. Small. Delicate. Like a child's voice humming an old tune. Not through the speakers. Through them. The engineer collapsed first. No cry. No warning. He just dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. His body twitched once. Then stilled. The medic dropped beside him, trying to shake him, whispering his name over and over, but he didn't respond. The captain backed away, breathing hard. Something was in the ship now. Not hiding. Not whispering. Present. He looked at the console again. 4 minutes. His hand slammed the emergency override. Nothing. It had locked him out. The fail-safe had failed. Then the viewport went dark. Not from the ship's systems. From something outside. The second vessel was no longer just floating near them. It was consuming them. A black wall pressed against the Resolute's glass, folding around the ship like a closing fist. And inside that darkness shapes moved. Large, crawling, whispering. Familiar. Too familiar. They looked like people. People the crew had known. Faces from Earth. Dead family. Lost friends. One of them even looked like the captain. Exactly like him. And then the lights returned, just one. A single screen. It showed Earth. But not as they left it. Burning skies. Cities empty. Oceans black. And then, below the image, a new message began to scroll. Contact successful. Link established. Transmission spreading. The medic gasped. No. It wasn't supposed to reach Earth. It wasn't. She turned to the captain. We were supposed to contain it. He stared at her. What do you mean? She took a shaky breath. The Resolute wasn't a rescue mission. It was a cage. We weren't sent to help anyone. We were sent to make sure it stayed buried. The air around them crackled. Electric. Sure. It wasn't a scream exactly. It was worse. Laughter. Low, deep laughter coming from the ship's core. The sound of something ancient and victorious. Something that had waited eons to cross over. The engineer suddenly sat up. Eyes pitch black. His voice was not his. Thank you, he said. To all of you. He stood slowly. You brought us home. The captain lunged. Tackled him. Tried to reach the core access panel behind the console. Everything turned to chaos. The ship shuddered. The hull groaned. And the countdown ticked down to 1 minute. The captain yanked open the panel. Inside, among the mess of wires and freezing metal, was the physical key, the last resort. A single fuse box with an old-fashioned manual kill switch. Mechanical. Analog. Immune to system override. His hand gripped it. But the medic caught his wrist. Tears streaked her face. If you do this, she said, we all die. He looked at her. If I don't, Earth dies. She said nothing. Then quietly she let go. He pulled the switch. For half a second everything stopped. No sound. No motion. Just light. Brilliant white light that surged through the ship's frame, bursting from every crack, every vent, every circuit. It hit the dark vessel like a wave, tearing it back, unraveling its shape, sending the shadows screaming into the void. The figures on the hull shattered into sparks. The black shell peeled away. And then, silence. Total, perfect silence. The ship was dead. The captain lay on the floor, coughing. Sparks rained from the ceiling. The medic crawled to his side, still breathing. The engineer was gone. No body. No trace. The only sound left was the quiet hum of emergency backup power coming online. Earth was safe. At least for now. The transmission had been cut mid-sequence. No further link. No breach. The darkness had been sealed again. He sat up dizzy. Looked at the screen. It was blank. Just static. But then, just as he reached to shut it off, a faint whisper crept through the silence. A new voice. One he hadn't heard before. Not the entity. Not the medic. Not himself. A child. Soft. Curious. Are you still there? He froze. Turned to the medic. She was pale. What is it? She asked. He stared at the static. I think, he whispered, I think someone else heard the call. And then, buried beneath the broken signals, a new message blinked across the console. Response received. Another vessel inbound. The screen turned black. And the stars outside shifted again. The silence inside the Resolute didn't feel like peace. It felt like the air had forgotten how to breathe. After everything, the signal, the second ship, the purge, it should have been over. But that final whisper, that voice asking asterisk, are you still there? Asterisk, it lingered. Like an echo that didn't belong in their world but refused to leave. The captain didn't move for a while. He just sat there, on the floor of the bridge, eyes fixed on the black screen that had once shown the face of Earth. His hand still ached from gripping the manual override switch, the old fuse blackened from the surge. Smoke clung to the walls. The hum of emergency systems buzzed softly in the background, faint and tired, like the ship itself was catching its breath. The medic sat next to him, quiet. Her face was pale, streaked with soot and dried tears. She hadn't said anything since the final light faded. Her mind looked like it was still somewhere else, maybe back in the fog or maybe still hearing the voices. He turned to her finally. Do you think it's really over? He asked. She didn't answer at first. Then her eyes drifted to the ceiling, like she was listening for something. I don't think it ever really ends, she said. Not with something like this. He nodded. That was the part he hadn't said aloud yet, the part he couldn't stop thinking about. They stopped the first breach. They cut the signal. Shut the door. But something had heard them. And now something else was coming. He stood, slowly, his body heavy with exhaustion. Around them the ship was dark. Burnt. Broken. Half the corridors were collapsed. The AI was offline. Only a handful of systems responded at all, and even those flickered like they weren't sure if they wanted to stay awake. He tapped into the emergency logs. 2 confirmed life signs. Everyone else was gone. The engineer, the pilot, the others, they'd either disappeared or changed. Whatever that presence was, it hadn't needed to kill them. It only needed to use them. He didn't know if they were dead. Maybe worse. He downloaded what remained of the data core, backing up fragments of audio logs, ship diagnostics, the final signal files, and every visual recording from the bridge. Most of it was corrupted. But not all. They'd need it, if they ever got back. The medic was looking out through the observation window. The stars had returned. No more black wall. No more false constellations. Just space. Cold, infinite, and, this time, honest. She said softly, "There's still time." He looked at her. Time for what? To warn them. Before the next one arrives. The ship had one emergency beacon left. Small, old, and never meant to send complex data. But it could send a burst. A pulse. A basic message. He nodded. "We'll tell them the truth. All of it." They moved together through the damaged corridor, flashlight beams cutting through smoke. The ship groaned softly, like it didn't want them to go. When they reached the auxiliary beacon station, the walls around them hummed again. Not violently. Not angry. Just present. Like something watching from the far end of a long, dark hall. The medic paused, hand hovering over the panel. "What if we're the reason it finds them?" she whispered. He placed his hand beside hers. "We're not the signal anymore," he said. "We're the warning." They powered the beacon. The screen flickered. A small countdown began, short this time. 30 seconds. He loaded the emergency summary into the data bank. Unknown signal received. Alien presence hijacked ship systems. Crew compromised. Failsafe used. New contact imminent. He added one last line. "Do not answer unknown calls from deep space." They stepped back. Watched the beacon flash once, then disappear into the stars. It would reach Earth in weeks. If Earth was still listening. Then again, if something else got there first, maybe it didn't matter anymore. The days that followed blurred. They rationed supplies, mapped what remained of the ship, searched for anything usable. Found old suits. Scrambled together a working med unit. The medic ran tests on both of them. Their vitals were mostly normal. But their brain activity still showed odd fluctuations. Spikes and signal patterns that didn't match anything known. She didn't tell him at first. Just ran the scans twice. Then a third time. Finally, she sat across from him in the med bay, screen turned away, and said quietly, "I think we brought some of it back with us." He looked at her. "You mean the signal?" She shook her head. "No. I mean, it changed us." He didn't ask what that meant. There was no need. He felt it too. Sometimes, in the quiet, when he closed his eyes, he heard voices. Not like before, no whispers, no commands. Just echoes. Words he didn't understand. Shapes behind his eyelids that didn't feel like dreams. They hadn't just survived. They'd become part of something bigger. Connected. The strange part? He wasn't sure he hated it. There was a moment, just once, when he was fixing a broken coolant valve and thought, what if it wasn't evil? What if it had only been lonely? But he pushed the thought aside. That's how it got in. Eventually a signal came through. From Earth. It wasn't a voice. Just a data burst. Simple. Clean. Real. Asterisk message received. Beacon confirmed. Backup vessels en route. Asterisk. He stared at it for a long time. Backup vessels. They were sending others. The medic exhaled slowly. It's starting again. He tapped the console. Tried to reply. Couldn't. Their comm system was too damaged to respond. They were just a ghost floating through space now. One broken ship, 2 survivors, and the memory of something older than stars. The days stretched on. One night, or whatever passed for night on the ship, the captain woke from a dream. Not a nightmare. A memory. He stood in a field on Earth. Real grass. Real sky. His brother calling out from the hill, laughing. The sun warm on his face. It felt so real he didn't want to open his eyes. When he did, the medic was there. Sitting nearby, wrapped in an old blanket. She looked at him. "You saw it too?" He nodded. "We're not dying," she said. "Not yet." He He didn't reply. They both knew it wasn't that simple. Then weeks later the long-range sensors pinged. A ship. Real. Human. Designated Unity 7. Command class. Mad. The Resolute drifted into visual range, and for the first time since the purge, the stars blinked in something close to hope. They watched the docking clamps extend. He turned to the medic. If we go back, we can't lie. She gave him a tired smile. We don't have to. They won't believe us anyway. The airlock hissed. The doors opened. Lights flooded in. Voices. Suits. Human faces. They stepped forward, blinking against the light. The rescue crew welcomed them with relief, with confusion, with too many questions. Where had they been? What happened to the others? Why was the signal scrambled? The captain answered as best he could. But most of it didn't matter now. Not really. What mattered was this. They made it out. They weren't the same. They never would be. But they were still human. And for now that was enough. They were quarantined. Tested. Debriefed. Isolated. The reports said they were stable. Physically. But they still had dreams. The same dreams. And somewhere in those dreams, a voice still waited. It didn't ask for help anymore. Just watched. And listened. Months later, the final report on the Resolute was classified. The ship was never recovered. All mention of the failed mission was buried beneath layers of clearance. But sometimes, in the quiet corners of mission control, the analysts whispered rumors. That a second signal had returned. Different. Calmer. And that something was listening from farther out than anyone had ever imagined. Back on Earth, the captain now walked through city streets like any other man. A scar behind his ear. Eyes that saw a little too much. The medic lived nearby. They didn't talk much about what happened, but they stayed close. They didn't know if the signal was truly gone. They only knew it had changed everything. One night, he sat alone, watching the stars from a rooftop. No sound. No whispers. Just the breeze. And then, barely noticeable, a flicker across the sky. Not a star. Not a satellite. Something different. And he smiled. Because now, he understood. It was never about being the first to hear a voice in the dark. It was about how we respond. And humanity? They didn't answer with silence. They answered with fire. With courage. With presence. And maybe, just maybe, that was what the dark wanted all along. Not destruction. Not control. Just connection. And the moment we answered, the universe finally listened. The end. If you made it this far, you're one of the few who knows the truth now. The question is, what would you do if the signal reached Earth? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's see how humanity would respond, together. And if this story lit a fire in you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the signal bell. There's more coming, much more. See you on the next transmission.